Hi, I'm Bradley, and welcome back to my devlog for the Ashes at the Crossroads Metroidvania. Um, as a note, episode 1 was the vision I have for my game and why I'm making it. So, what the game is and why I'm making it. This episode is different. This is more on how my process, what my process is, and what I've done in the last week. So in the last week since episode 1, I've made and reversed major decisions, redesigned systems, and thrown out 3 days of work. And this is what my game form of game design looks like. I'm not saying this is what a professional studio will do. I am an indie dev. So this episode exists because I'm in the design phase and everything's living in documents and there's no code. Um, and my design is evolving and changing quite rapidly. And I have done multiple review sessions and major revisions and redesigned and replaced entire systems. Um, so I just wanted to be someone who shows the entire process, not just the polished final draft. Um, and then I'd rather show you something that might change than pretend I have all the answers. So the vision from episode 1, which is the mythology, the shapeshifting, the coalition, that's all pretty solid. Very little of that will change, um, if anything. But the specifics of how it all fits together, that's all still being worked out. So my design process is I use AI, plain and simple. Um, but I use AI in a way that makes the results better than just asking AI. So it's called Tree of Thought, which is a process where you designate a series of personas that have specialties and perspectives. I have very fleshed out ones who not only have specialties but also have hills that they die on. Um, and basically, you use these personas as a panel to pose ideas and bounce off of, and to help guide you. And it helps the AI to actually, one, output things in a readable format, not just in generic AI language. And it forces it to look at things from different perspectives and take in and apply things. And so the way it works for me is I feed in design docs, and the personas I have review the design docs. And so I have two sets of personas. I have game design ones and architecture ones. And this is software architecture. So there are two shared personas um, between the two, but the five that are for game design are I have a combat designer, a narrative designer, a systems designer, a level and world designer, and a player advocate. And they each read the docs and flag issues from their angle. And then on the architecture side, I have personas that are focused on stuff like Rust or ECS patterns, data flow, and then implementation feasibility or scope, because scope creep is real and we need to make sure we're addressing that issue. And so the personas don't just give opinions, they debate. And then basically one persona will propose a change, but then another will push back, being like, hey, this is why this doesn't work. And then the original persona will argue with that persona, and it goes back and forth. And then most of my reviews are have a moderator whose job it is to keep things on track, and then also make sure that the everything's being tracked and flagging any unresolved conflicts. Um, and so in the last week alone, which is really more so the last 4 or 5 days, I've run over 8 reviews on my entire project. Um, and this is quite a few files that I've edited and changed with the help of AI. It's roughly I want to say it's 20 to 30 files, and I think the shortest file is 100 lines long, and they're all in Markdown, so 100 lines means nothing. And I believe I have some that are closer to the 1,000 mark, but I'm not quite sure on that. But the first review I did was on the 13th. It was a review that covered combat healing, and then the biome 1 enemies, where I trimmed the boss's attacks, added a corridor that teaches you about wave attacks, and then designed the healing rules for the lion mini boss. It's really just a boss. And then the next day, I did 5 reviews. I reviewed my death and save system. I reviewed the economy, the map and UI. I reviewed the narrative and tone of Biome 1 and just the world as is. And then I reviewed the powers and abilities, and then the world structure, modding, and the sigil upgrade system, which will be discussed later. And then with those reviews, I locked down made decisions across the board. The next review, this is the big one where I ended up throwing out a lot of what I did in this review session. I used both persona sets to do a full cross-disciplinary review, and this caught an identity problem with my game, which I'll talk about more later, and kicked off a complete redesign of Biome 1. And then we get into the next one I did after I finished that one is a mechanics refinements session where I had AI identify, and this was with the personas, identify and propose values for anything that needed a concrete value, even if it needed playtesting for tuning. And so this resolved things like the parrying timing, the attack speed, the stagger duration, iframe values, stuff like that. And this is all derived from stuff like Hollow Knight or Nine Souls, like what timing do they use within their games, and then apply it to my game as the starting values. And then the next thing I did, one of the next things I did is a gap analysis, which found and resolved 19 architectural issues, 4 critical and 4 important, before any code was written. And these were big and would have caused major roadblocks, to the point where code would stop because the design wasn't where it needed to be. I will note, no decision was made by AI without my input. So if AI came up with something, I had to read through and approve the change before the change got put in place. And then these design docs aren't something I'm going to write once and file away. As mentioned before, I will review them, and they're a living system that will get attacked from every angle until there's no more weak points, or as few weak points as is feasible as a solo dev with only the help of AI, which a lot better than what I can do by myself. So Biome 1 redesign, there's a lot that occurred in this. So as mentioned before, this was cross-disciplinary. It had all 5 game design personas and then the additional architecture personas reading every doc. And so first thing that got flagged was both the combat designer and the player advocate flagged that for my MVP/demo, the identity that it presented was off or wrong. So the game is supposed to be a shape-shifting Metroidvania, but the entire first biome, which is the only thing in the MVP or demo, has no shape-shifting. So players would finish the first release thinking it was a solid parry combat game. Not that. This is a solid shape-shifting game, or an interesting take on a shape-shifting Metroidvania. Which there was a counter argument from the narrative designer who pushed back saying, hey, the pacing of Biome 1 was deliberate, so things flowed smoothly, and the pacing was good and not too fast and not too slow. Um, and then the systems designer uh, proposed a compromise that I ended up exploring. And this compromise was, what if the wolf form, the first shape-shifting form, appears in biome 1, but only for traversal, not combat, um, which allows you to get the transformation moment without overloading the combat system. So what I did here is I more or less ended up exploring the entirety of biome 1, adding the wolf in, and while the systems designer persona um, proposed the compromise of only traversal for the wolf form, I ended up actually having combat in the wolf form, um, not for very long, but just for a little. Um, so um, this this first iteration had full wolf combat, not for most of the, as I mentioned, not for most of the biome. It's only roughly 4 or 5 rooms that you could do it before you, um, including the final boss for the biome. Um, and I made a new boss, which was a very interesting boss. I'm going to potentially use him later, um, when I have later releases and I'm comfortable with where I have biome 1 and the other biomes. And if it fits, and this boss had this tell um, for what kind of form it was in to determine whether or not it was you are the human form and you can parry and counter attack, getting the damage boost, or if you should be in wolf form so you can avoid the attacks because they come at you faster. And then I also had Hecate appearing to grant the wolf form. It was more so stabilizing it. So basically, you awaken the wolf form in the lion boss fight. The lion lives, and so becomes you can fight recurring character boss, and then but it only appeared strong enough for you to traverse things. If you took any damage, you reverted back to wolf form, back to human form. Or if you tried to attack, you also reverted back. Um, and then Hecate stabilized that so you could actually use, um, actually do combat. Um, and this is a massive scope increase, and the vast majority of the biome changed. Um, and then I did a brief iteration where I scaled back on the wolf traversal and combat, but it was still way too many new mechanics for the biome. And at this point, I was well over 7.5 hours in, 7 hours in, and I had done a complete design of 22 rooms for this biome, which is really more so for um, 4 biomes in one, giving you a realm, as I'm calling them in game, and then your actual biomes. Um, the new boss was a golem with the shader for the attack tells. I had done the full wolf moveset for combat, and then the full form, a brand new way. I had a brand new, like, finalized way of shifting forms, and added environmental hazards to the biome. And I got rid of the stamina resource. Um, Anyways, when I then counted the concepts for the biome, the restructure, there's roughly 18 to 20 mechanics being taught within 2 to 3 hours of gameplay. That's a lot, and the original design only taught 10 to 12, so half at most. Um, and the pacing just, there was no room for any mechanic to breathe, and it wasn't good, and it was a lot faster than I wanted. And then I did a third and fourth slight iteration, more so in my head than down on paper, where what if there's only wolf traversal? Still felt like too much. And then I also considered removing the torch blessing um, from biome 1 entirely. And then, but these together, maybe 20 minutes of work before it's like, it doesn't fit well and you don't end on a good note. And so I reverted back to my original plan. And so 8 hours of work, 22 room layout, new boss, full move set, and my answer, go back to what I had. And it's not a failure. It was the original design was right for reasons I couldn't see until I changed it. Well, tried to. And then, so I reverted biome structure, but a ton of system level decisions survived. And so here's what I kept. A combo system. So each form now has opt-in attack chains. Human form gets a two-hit attack chain, and then the wolf gets 3, and the ram gets 1. And then each button press is a decision. You press during the recovering window of the attack or during the actual attack animation to continue the chain, or don't, and it resets. And then damage escalates slightly. I believe it goes maybe 2 to 4, depending on what the chain is up. It's not by much, but you get more damage, and so the finisher is a payoff and a risk. And then, as I mentioned earlier, I completely removed stamina from the game. So form switching, which was originally the only thing that used stamina, now has cooldowns. So every form has a cooldown, and it's per form, not, oh, I shapeshifted into a wolf form, I can't shapeshift out. And so once you leave a form, you can't go back into it for a few seconds. This is, and so if I go into wolf form, I can go into ram form, but I can't go back to wolf form. And so there's no consumable resource and no, oh, I ran out of this identity, this core identity to this game mechanic feeling. And as a note, reverting to base form is always free. And there is no I believe there, I don't know if this was fully decided yet, but there's, as far as I'm aware, no cooldown switching out of base form. So you can always go back to human form. Yeah. And then the next thing I kept was the wolf moveset, which is going to be a claw, bite chain, only going forward. And then the dash button is going to be the same button as the base form's dodge roll. And then you sprint by holding the button. So this is similar to Silksong, where you press the right trigger and you dash. And if you continue holding it, you are running. And then it's going to have a low profile hitbox. So some attacks that hit the base form won't hit the wolf, simply by virtue of the wolf's too short. And then the wolf can't attack up or down, which forces you to deal with aerial enemies in your base form, not in your wolf form. That, or get really good at jumping and hitting them in the air. And that constraint is part of the identity. And then I got concrete mana values. So I'm pulling from Hollow Knight, where Hollow Knight, you have 99 soul at start. So I have 99 max mana, and you get 33 per heal. And then it's going to be 3 heals for the full bar, and you get 6 mana per melee hit. 15 per, actually, those numbers I don't think are quite right. I might have to, so current numbers are 6 mana per melee hit, 15 for a perfect parry, 8 for a partial parry, and so it's roughly 5 to 6 hits to get one heal, and then you can get 2 to 3 perfect parries and do the same. So it rewards you for parrying well in the base form. And then I kept the form switch input, so the tap, so it's you tap a button to toggle between base human form and the last animal form you took, and then you hold it instead for a radial wheel, where using the joystick you select which one you want, and time doesn't freeze, but it does slow down, and this radial wheel will show the cooldown state of the forms. And then the boss concept, the golem, that is being shelved for a later biome, as mentioned earlier. So it's not lost. It's just put aside for now. Um, and then there's the idea that basically the redesign of the lion encounter actually made it an unwinnable fight. And that idea is shelved, and it might come back. It could be how you unlock the wolf in biome 2. Don't know yet. I did a slight rework to one of the enemies in the shrine, which I'll go more into biome 1 later. But there's this enemy that you could only block by, you could only initially deal damage by staggering it. So now it's, you can attack it from behind because the shield it holds only protects it from the front. So if you stagger it when it tries to hit you, you can attack it from the front. But if you're in wolf form, you can just dash past using your invincibility frames and hit it. And then the environmental hazards were kept, so thorny bushes in the forest, and then the residual magic energy that was powering the shrine, um, and irregular wave patterns for the wave teaching room. And then every single one of these decisions will apply regardless what biome the wolf form shows up in. And the restructure that gave me the pressure to force them into existence. Okay. And then some other changes, not necessarily from this major redesign. Another change was you no longer, initially you killed the lion mini boss, and it was a 2-phase fight where you kill a grieving cub. Now it's single phase, you scar its face and it flees. So the lion lives and it can come back. And it still had this reveal where you see a massive dead lion, and you still see that it wasn't a full grown, it was a child. It was scared, it was angry, it was grieving, and you just fought it and scarred it. And then I reworked the first boss's attacks. So he originally had attacks that were based off of a golem, which the golem has now been shelved as its own boss. And so now he purely fights with magic from the shrine. His attacks are called Ward Pulse, Shrine Pillar. There's a brand new range attack called Shrine Bolt that I added, and then a Ward Shield. And it just helps sell him as this scared researcher using what's around him, not someone reanimating dead constructs. And then I redesigned the onboarding, where basically you wake up with enough mana to heal a bit and low health, because you wake up after your village has been destroyed, so it doesn't make sense for you to have full health when your village was just destroyed. So the very first thing you do in game is you learn how to heal, and you get to heal enough that but your mana becomes empty before you are fully healed. And then you learn to attack because there's going to be some breakables, which breakables in this game will actually drop mana, not a lot, but some. And so you recharge some mana from there. And then in order to learn that you can get mana from hitting living things, there's going to be these corrupted sheep. They're going to be completely passive. And you just hit them. Bang, bang, bang. And then you don't learn parrying until you meet the first enemy in the forest, which is going to be a boar. And then I completely removed the currency from the game, so I was using drachmae. It just makes sense thematically to use drachmae, but I'm no longer going to have it because it just doesn't fit with biome 1, and it didn't make sense for the demo for you to have access to this resource and not use it. And it was just one more thing to work on when I'm already expanding scope quite a bit, to be honest. There's still going to be a death vision, so you get a glimpse of crossroads. You get a glimpse of what killed you and how you died. And then so later on, when currency is added back, you will have the vision mechanics still there. It's just the stakes have now increased. Another change I made was the Ram had this counter charge. I'm going to go into the forms combat stuff in a later episode. And so um, I'll actually discuss that later. And then a architectural decision I made is to make it so everything's timed in seconds, not in frame counts, because when you have things in frame counts, if somebody's running the game at twice the speed, at twice the frame rate, the game runs at twice the speed. So if I update a timing, I don't have to worry about if I update a fixed time step, I don't have to worry about data values changing and having to figure out the math between, oh, I want this to not be 150 milliseconds. I want it to be at 200. How many frames is that? And then, as mentioned before, I did some perfect timing values resolved, which you have a perfect parry window, which is roughly 0.133 seconds. The total parry window is about 0.3 of a second. Things are only staggered for 0.9, and it's actually going to vary based off the enemy. And so it's and that 0.9 seconds is just long enough to get a full 2 hit chain in the base form, and it's deliberately too short for a heal, but not too short for you to reposition yourself so you can heal. Because like Silksong, Whole Night Silksong, when you heal, if you're midair, you're hovering. I like that mechanic quite a lot. And then there's going to be a parry recovery window. So if you try to parry and you fail, as in the enemy didn't attack you and didn't hit you, you have a 0.45 second currently recovery window, which is long enough that you can take one hit, but also not short enough. But it's also not it's short enough that you're not going to go into a death spiral. And then one thing I'm actively working through right now is what game engine I'm going to use. And so last episode I said Rust using the Bevy game engine. Now I'm considering a very different approach. So I'm considering using Godot for the visual and editor side. There's just a lot of tooling that it's a lot easier with Godot to do stuff like level design and animations than it is with Bevy. And then still using Rust, but using it purely for the game logic, and then using what's known in software engineering as a mediator design pattern for passing messages or commands between two systems. Um, and so um, the mediator is in Rust, but the mediator is the game logic can still run even without the mediator there. It just the game logic sends the signals. And so Godot has the scene editor, the level editor, animation tools, and audio system that I have to build from scratch with Bevy. It's just rough. And then Bevy's also pre 1.0. And every change, every version has breaking changes. And it's hard to upgrade, especially when a lot of what I need is in crates, and those crates rely on a specific version of Bevy. And then the reason for not using pure Godot is I honestly want Rust. It is a very performance capable language, and that matters when I need timing and frame precise combat, which parrying requires. And then a um, and then using an ECS pattern, which I'm still planning on using, which is why I'm going to be using a mediator pattern um, to communicate between Godot and Rust. Um, it fits shapeshifting. ECS fits shapeshifting really well, and so swapping form components changes the whole combat system, and it's pretty simple and easy to do, and it's not as complicated as it probably would be if I tried to do an inheritance heavy system. But nothing's decided. Currently, I have a 6-layer architect system, which has a foundation through content and with every layer testable before the next one starts. And those decisions will survive any engine choice, because the idea is bottom up, testable at every layer. Everything's data driven, and nothing's prematurely abstracted. Um, it's just specific implementation of the architecture will vary. And I'm not going to say what I've chosen yet until I've actually decided. And then when I do, I'll, you'll probably hear about it in an episode, and I'll explain why. Okay, so into what's stable and what's in flux. So what's stable is um, the basically the Greco-Roman mythology being real, being a demigod child of Hecate, the coalition of forgotten gods, the torch being a bloodline power, not a physical object, shapeshifting, which is actually going to be 3+ forms, meaning 3+ identities. Currently it's set at 3, but I'm considering adding a water form. And then the tone is going to be quite dark, but purposeful. And then the moral complexity is going to come through the framing of the story, pairing as a core mechanic of the game, especially for the human form. And then it is going to be data driven and modding friendly. I might have to hold off on some of my intentions when it comes to modding, simply because that's a lot of extra scope to implement those, and then having it be complete at every size. So there's an endpoint, probably a cliffhanger, but there's an endpoint with every release, and it's not just, oh, I managed to get this cool unlock and I can't do anything with it, which admittedly is biome 1, but you can still, yeah. And then things that are in flux is obviously the engine choice, the timing values, which are going to have to be found through playtesting, the exact attacks that bosses have. I'm more or less decided on the onboarding flow, but that could still change. Obviously, resource systems can easily change. I did it in my last redesign. The pacing could change. How specific enemies act can change. And then I could change stuff like how the lion fight occurs. And then also later on, the currency presence could change. So basically, it's everything in the top box is what makes the game this game. And then everything in the bottom box is how we get there. So the top won't change, but the bottom could change every week. Okay. Anyways, what's next? So future episodes will dig into game systems, stuff like the combat, the forums, the world, the story. Um, Obviously, details might shift between when I film and when you watch. If something changes, I'll tell you what's changed, why, and what survived. It'll probably be an episode a lot like this one rather than like the first one. And then once code exists, changes get smaller because you can't redesign freely when systems are built. Um, and then next episode is most likely going to be the engine decision, what I chose, and what that means for the project. And then the destination hasn't changed, the route might, and every detour so far has made the design better, not worse, even if it meant scratching a lot of work.